So, now we know. They've debated, they've shouted, they've called each other names, and on occasions they've even talked a bit of policy. Now, America's politicians can do no more. Over the past few hours, the people have been having their say, and the results are in. The Democrats have won a majority in the US House of Representatives. The first time in 8 years that's happened, but any left-leaning celebration is severely tempered. The Republicans kept control of the Senate. In fact, their position in the upper house is strengthened. So who's won? Certainly, if you read President Trump's tweets, you'd be mistaken for thinking the Democrats have been wiped off the political face of the country. Yet pictures bombarding social media tell a different story as Democrat after Democrat overturns the House of Representatives, arriving in Washington fresh from battle and eager to inflict a fatal wound on their president. Barack Obama said this election was a fight for the very character of the country. But what is that character now? And here in Beijing, how is the Chinese government reacting to all this? Are they breaking out the Baijiu, or are they preparing their firepower for another volley in the trade war? Welcome to The Point. I'm Jeff Moody, sitting in for Liu Xin. Okay, well, joining me in the Beijing studio for this special program, Gong, the Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and my colleague, Erica Pitzi, who's a CGTN colleague and American. Some would say very American. Thank you both for joining me. But let's start with you then, Erica. Who's won? I mean, Trump has just been tweeting that he's got magic coming out of his ears.
Oh, goodness.
Magic coming out of his ears, for goodness sake. That's how he's saying. He's claiming a major victory here, and yet he's lost control of the House of Representatives. What do we make of this?
Exactly. I mean, there really is no clear-cut winner here when it comes to Republicans or Democrats, because obviously we know that the Democrats took the House, so that's a win for them. But then they lost seats in the Senate, so the Republicans keep the Senate. In my opinion, the big loser here is actually President Trump, because he did lose the House to the Democrats, so undoubtedly they're going to get in the way of his agenda. And then there's one other thing here. There were some key states that actually sent President Trump to the White House back in 2016, and some of those states actually flipped, voted in Democratic governors, and that could really cause problems for him come 2020.
So he's been saying this is a referendum about his own popularity. I mean, he's been there at the stump saying this all along, hasn't he? And my name isn't on the ballot paper, but imagine it is, folks. Imagine it is and vote. So that's come back to bite him, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has. I mean, he has basically told his base as he was going to all of these rallies. I mean, we were looking at him stumping for nearly 50 rallies over the past month leading up to the midterm election day, and he said, pretend I'm on the ballot. A vote for this Republican is a vote for me. But you know what? That ended up sending Democrats running right to the polls.
Because the Democrats were pretending he was on the ballot too.
Yeah, no kidding.
At least from the results perspective, I don't think that Donald Trump really lost much. I mean, it's already predicted that the Democrats are going to take control of the Congress, and they actually gained some seats in the Senate. And also, if you look at the popular votes, the people who are voting for the Republicans, close to 50%, I think it's a 47-some percentage of the American people voted for Donald Trump, for Republicans. And you know, this election is mostly about Donald Trump. I mean, look at the recent events. There was this massacre in Pittsburgh, and this, the bomb threats in for a couple of Democrats leaders. And even under this kind of environment, there are still so many Americans, close to 50% of Americans, voted essentially for Donald Trump. So I think from that perspective, I don't believe that Donald Trump is actually losing this battle. I think his popularity is gaining.
But John, in a way, surely both sides have lost, because the Republicans are now going to be thwarted at every single step. We've now got an American president, like happened with Barack Obama in the past, like has happened to so many presidents in the past, who now can't really achieve what he wants to achieve. Whether we like what he wants to achieve or not, he can't actually achieve it. He is a lame duck president. Erica, would you say he's a lame duck president now?
I mean, I guess you could look at it that way. I mean, he is definitely going to have some problems. I mean, the Democrats are going to go for blood, not to mention here that they have already vowed, now that they have control of the House, they're going to investigate him.
They're going to do an awful lot of things, aren't they? Let's run through some of the things that they're planning to do. I mean, they're planning to get his tax returns finally out in the open. Right. They're planning to launch yet another probe in the whole Russia investigation, the Russia thing, as your president refers to it all. What else how much damage do you think they can actually do?
I don't really know the answer to that.
I think one more thing I want to add is that they'll probably open another investigation into the Carnival nomination. Anything wrong with that? So, you know, these, and I'm pretty sure they're also going to organize several hearings, public hearings into the Russian investigation just to humiliate him, to dig dirt and put it on national TV, let everybody see this. But again, I think in despite of all these things, the things that we've been thinking about and been talking about, look at the news coverage in Washington Post, in New York Times, look at CNN. Even after all this, he is still very popular.
Yeah, hold on, John. I do want to just stop you there with this popularity thing, because you have to look at the turnout. I mean, turnout is a reflection on popularity as well. Leading up to the midterms, we know that he had the lowest approval rating, 39% of any president in recent history, first of all. And that also is reflected in the turnout. I love this statistic. 114 million votes cast in the U.S. House races in this midterm election versus 83 million back in 2014. That's
huge.
Massive.
Yeah.
That
massive,
really
but
does reflect, I think, his popularity as well, especially if we're calling this election a referendum on his presidency.
Yes, it does, because with so many people voting, I mean, for the last 2 years, the Democrats have they pumped more money into this campaign than we've seen ever. More money has gone into this campaign. The ads have been stronger. The Democrat anger that's been welling in the last 2 years after the worst, most stinging defeat they ever could endure 2 years ago, they have gone all out, energizing young voters, energizing people of color, energizing the LGBT community, and as John says, still he's there, still he has the Senate, still he has control. So in a way you could look at this as a massive failure for the Democrats.
I'm not sure it's a massive failure, but at least I think statistics speak for itself. Even look at the way they actually win the Congress. I mean, several states are very close. I have never seen statistics like this, you know, in these Senate elections in several states. 49% point something versus 48. I mean, it's so
cliffhanger races and even potential recounts. I mean, Georgia, oh my goodness, the governor race there, super tight. Yeah,
so I think what tells us is that America is becoming more and more divisive. People are getting more and more angry, and that you know, people really want to speak out for themselves. You know, so I think it's the U.S. American politics is getting really nasty and polarized.
Well, yes. Okay. So let's look at that then, Erica. President Obama Barack Obama said that this was a test of the very character of the nation. What a great line. You know, he all along Obama has talked about character, upstanding qualities, decency and values and stuff, which is something that Trump has never considered, let alone spoken about. So this is a test of the character of the nation. But looking at these results, the nation is as confused and divided as it has been for years. You know, we've still got the same scenario that on the coasts and in the big cities we have all the liberals, the Democrats pushing their agenda of healthcare, equal rights, diversity, love everybody, etc., etc., etc. And then in the middle of America, you've got a completely different breed of person, haven't you? America is, you know, gun control, immigration, those are the things that they care about the most. America's as schizophrenic as ever when it comes to their character, surely.
I do want to add something to that, though, because part of the phenomenon when it comes to President Trump, I mean, how he even, you know, was able to make it into the White House, has to do with these Trump voters, which are really non-traditional voters. Okay, yes, they are from rural areas. We know that they are statistically somewhat uneducated when it comes to actual government policy. And I think in the end, most of the people, his base, actually succumbed to just this fiery Trump talk, whether he's talking about building the wall, whether he's talking about locking Hillary up, or whether he's talking about fake news. They sort of love that. I think some of the sort of reporters on the campaign trail along, during the midterms here were talking about Trump sort of throwing red meat to his base. And that's what he was doing when he started to amp up that, increasingly divisive rhetoric when it comes to the migrant caravans, calling them an invasion, when he was basically demonizing
for a while,
immigrants.
telling troops to shoot at them.
Oh, exactly. Demonizing immigrants as violent criminals.
But these people that have these views, that go to Trump's rally, that say lock her up and all the other things that they're talking about, those views, they have a right to those views. That they're voters, they're legal voters, they have a right to that opinion, and they voted their candidate into the White House. And now, because of the system that you have in the United States, it's a similar system to the UK, but not quite. The system that you have means that those voters now won't be able to get what they wanted, because the Democrats are going to thwart everything he does, just like the Republicans did with Barack Obama 8 years ago.
Right, but doesn't that reflect both sides? Because if we're talking about how tight these races are, we are seeing two sides of this story here. You've got literally two halves of the country, and it's represented in just that.
I see political gridlock down the road. I think the Democrats in the Congress is going to not going to let Donald Trump to carry out his agenda that easily. That's for sure. But also want to add a note to the other characteristic of the American political system. That is to give this proportional power to those Midwest states, these agricultural states, in the Senate. I mean, just one example I mentioned, the state of Wyoming. They have 500,000 people. They have 2 senators in the Senate. And 500,000 people is the city of Austin, the state of Texas, right? So, and they have two senators' votes there. So this system is very difficult to change. I mean, in those states, there are always going to be Republicans controlling the states. So that tells that the Republican side controlling the Senate, I think it's going to last for a long time. It's not going to change anytime soon.
Meanwhile, of course, the NPC here in China comes up with a 5-year plan. They get on and they do the 5-year plan without any opposition, and then they come up with another 5-year plan and they achieve that. And so we see the China we have today, whereas America is a very different system. But let's not get into that at this stage. I want to, very briefly, because we've only got about a minute left, so I want you to discuss one word for me now, Erica, a dreaded word. Impeachment. This is now a real possibility. Is it a probability, though?
I don't think so. And we even heard from one of the big-time Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, who will likely become the Speaker of the House once the Democrats take control. And she really came out just a couple of weeks ago and said, she doesn't want to go down that road. But, I mean, look, she wants to actually get some stuff done. This is what she said. I mean, granted, she is a career politician here, but she had basically said, if we go down the impeachment road, if there really is something there that we need to look at and need to really consider, she wants the Republicans on board. But that does not mean they aren't going to investigate him, meaning President Trump, on accusations of corruption, sexual misconduct, and potential collusion with Russia. My concern, are the Democrats going to get too distracted with all that, and then the American people are left with what?
I mean, I think we're going to have to stop there, unfortunately, but I think we still haven't worked out who's the winner and who's the loser, but I think we can both agree on the fact that the media is the winner here, because we've now got 2 years of endlessly fascinating stories coming out of your country.
You bet.
Erica Pitzi, CGTN anchor and friend, and John Gong, thank you both very much indeed for joining me. Well, we'll take a short break now. When we come back, America, the world is watching you, and nowhere more so than right here in Beijing. But what do the Chinese see when they're watching America? Do they see a weakened president with more important things on his plate now than a trade war? Or maybe it doesn't matter what the American government's internal workings look like. After all, the man at the top is still Donald Trump. We'll find out in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Well, votes have been cast, decisions have been made, and the results are clear. US Congress is divided, with the Democrats taking the majority in the House of Representatives and the Republicans holding and expanding their majority in the Senate. So the result itself may be clear, but the message from the American voters less so. What are they trying to say? And how are the results going down in Beijing? After all, China has a keen interest in Washington's shenanigans for many reasons, the ongoing trade spat being just one of them. Well, joining me here in the Beijing studio is Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and from Washington, D.C., welcome Steve Pruitt, the Managing Partner at Watts Partners and former Staff Director of the Committee on the Budget of the U.S. House of Representatives. And from Philadelphia, Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer, President of Grasshopper Strategies. So plenty to delve into here. Let's start with you, Steve. So you were a Staff Director of the Committee on the Budget of the U.S. House of Representatives. From what you see today, this combination, the House of Representatives going one way, the Senate going the other, is this good for democracy? Are all the checks and balances now in place, do you think? Or is this just going to stymie progress, stymie the President from actually achieving anything?
Well, I'll make 2 points here. First, I think you and others in the media have got to stop looking at the United States using traditional metrics. The game in America has changed tremendously, and I think the most glaring example of that is the election of Donald Trump. He's not a politician, he's a businessman, he's very transactional, and he doesn't play by traditional political rules, and I think that is probably the biggest challenge that Congress has yet to face up to.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you,
but
you say that he doesn't play to political views, but the system that he operates in does, doesn't it? He might do things a very different way. He might do things his own way, but the system doesn't allow him to, surely.
Well, I would suggest even there the system is flexible enough that he's been able to bend it and mold it in different ways, essentially doing what he did in business. And I think Congress is starting to recognize that, and I think one of the challenges, and in your last segment it was talked about, is are the Democrats going to get distracted? I would suggest to you that there's probably a lesser likelihood of that given the composition of the Democratic caucus that we're going to be looking at come January. Contrary, again, to traditional metrics, that caucus is going to be very different. And yes, there will be voices that will be calling out the I word, as you noted. But I think the Democrats realize that looking at 2020, the only thing that's going to get the Democrats past 2020 is to start working and delivering on the promises that they've made literally since 2016, but certainly in 2018. That means they've got to get to work, they've got to start delivering on health care, prescription prices, infrastructure, and other key items that people want to see. They don't want to see gridlock. They made that clear in many of the elections that were voted on. And I think the Democrats and Congress, in fact, will bend to that. I think we're about to enter what I would describe as a let's make a deal era in America, and that probably bodes well not only for America but bodes well for our international partners as well.
Let's hope so. I mean, of course, make a deal can also be described as compromise, but that's a story for another day. Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer, you've been following this closely, of course, and we haven't talked about the drama of the night much so far. I mean, I read the other day that Bernie Sanders is tipped to run again in 2 years' time, which surely he's a little bit tired now. Surely he's had his day and didn't make it. But have you detected, watching what's happened over the last few hours, have you detected any rising stars in the party? Anybody that you see as a new Barack Obama?
Well, there's definitely not a new Barack Obama. The only people that would be considered to be rising stars at the moment might be Bernie Sanders. I know that seems odd considering how exposed he was in the last national election, but he is still the purveyor of many positive and progressive ideas that get people excited. Senator Warren, it's looking like she may have to break ranks with Bernie Sanders and try to become the standard bearer herself. And I think both of those potential candidates see positives in this election. My concern is, though, that they're also missing the negatives. A lot of the most popular nationally progressive candidates, Beto O'Rourke in Texas, Gillum in Florida, both lost pretty handily. I mean, they were closer than some might have expected, but they still lost. we still saw Democrats that were more progressive or even middle of the road lose in potential swing states for the presidential election. So the Democrats are caught between a rock and a hard place. They have a lot of people expecting the House to get really tough and really nasty against Donald Trump, but they're going to need a candidate nationally that's going to be talking about harmony and unity and bringing the country together. Being able to reconcile those two different arguments, those two different approaches, is going to be a huge communications challenge for the Democratic Party.
We need somebody whose slogan is stronger together. Maybe not, but you're right. We need somebody that can try and unify things.
I mean, they tried that already, right? They tried that already, and they didn't win it. But
exactly.
they're not going to get that out of this election. There was no stronger together message. They picked up a minimal amount of House seats to win. They lost seats in the Senate. They're in a bad spot. A lot of Democrats are cooing, but they're putting back the same leadership that they had in the House under President Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. They're bringing back a lot of the same characters. We're talking about bringing back Bernie Sanders. There's not really new blood, new energy, new approaches being put forward by the Democratic Party.
But there are new approaches when it comes to the type of person that is now coming forward. We are seeing a quote here from CNN's Van Jones. He said that we're now seeing a younger, browner, cooler, more women, more veterans. What do you say to that? Steve, what do you say to that? Is this a direct result of some of the rhetoric that's come out of Trump for the last 2-3 years?
No, I think it's driven primarily by demographic changes in America, first. Secondly, I believe that it's a realization on the part of at least the political system at large that these are the kind of candidates that we're going to be electing going forward from here. I believe that there's a reasonable chance that we will see new Democratic leadership. I think that there are ways to bring the wisdom and the experience that Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn have all brought to the table without necessarily having them take on the now, I think, a much larger burden of leadership. As we look forward here, we've got to have some stronger backs, some folks who really aren't 5 days from drawing a Social Security check.
So, Steve, let me get this right. You're saying that you don't see the fact that we've now got the first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress. We've got the first Native American woman elected to Congress. We've got the first openly gay candidate in Kansas. You don't think that that's anything to do with what's perceived as Trump's anti-Muslim agenda, his stiffening up, tightening up of LGBT rights, etc., etc., the way that he describes women? You don't think that's got anything to do with these candidates from these minorities coming forward?
I wouldn't say absolutely that it has nothing to do, but what I would argue again is that, you know, America is changing. The face, the color of America is changing, and in many respects it's changing faster than most folks want to acknowledge. So I see those candidacies really as more of a reflection of the America that we're going to be seeing going forward than I do as any reaction necessarily to Donald Trump.
John Gong, good news or bad news for China?
I think China tends to be a little bit indifferent to the changes in the Senate, in the Congress. You know, after all, U.S. congressional attitudes towards China is quite bipartisan. You look at the Congressional Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, they have a very bipartisan approach towards China, and I think on the China issue, most Congress members are actually behind Donald Trump. And also, I think that China may have a better chance at slowing Donald Trump from withdrawing from some multinational organizations in terms of defending the multinational organizations, the multilateralism. I think it's constrained a little bit by some more Democrats in the Congress. So I think from that perspective, it's probably a good thing from China's perspective. But overall, I think it tends to be quite. It's not going to change things a lot. I mean, look at the voting records for the Taiwan Travel Act. I mean, it passed without any one single vote opposing it. So I think there's a fair amount of wide consensus among politicians in Washington when it comes to America's China policy.
Yes, Brandon, we have to remember that there is a lot of cross-party support for this trade war, trade skirmish, trade battle, whatever you want to call it. The Democrats, on the whole, support it too, don't they?
They do. It will be one of the rare issues that will unfortunately unify Democrats and Republicans, which is China bashing. If you look at Nancy Pelosi, most likely once again going to be Speaker, she has a long history of being a heavy critic of China. So if China's looking for new friends in the Democrats, they're not really going to find them. What they are going to find is that people are going to need to be tough on someone as we approach 2020, and unfortunately it's going to be China. Further, if we're looking at slowing down President Trump's stepping back from multilateral trade organizations, it's only the Senate that has any say on that. The House of Representatives has almost no involvement in international trade approvals. So with the Republicans strengthening their position in the Senate, President Trump may see that as the one area that he actually has the green light to do what he wants. If he's stymied on domestic issues because the House of Representatives decides to blockade many of his ideas, he's going to turn back to international trade, he's going to speed up withdrawals, and he's going to keep busting on China, particularly if we see any sort of economic downturn in the next 2 years. He's got two ready-made targets to blame: Democrats in the House of Representatives and China.
So, Gong, G20 summit in Buenos Aires next month, business as usual, or to use an American word that I can't stand, normalcy.
Well, I think there are good signs coming out of the White House. I mean, he made a phone call to President Xi a few days ago, followed with a tweet saying that negotiations are underway that will ultimately lead to the summit, and he thinks that there's some kind of agreement that can be reached. So I think, and it's also, our political member, Mr. Yang Jiechi, is going to be in Washington this Friday to talk with Pompeo as well as Jim Mattis. So I think at least the two sides are back to the negotiating table. So, so the question is really, is this election result going to make any changes or derail the planned summit meeting between these two guys? I think it's highly unlikely. I think Donald Trump has enough political capital behind him to proceed with his own agenda. So I think, so from that perspective, I think probably it's not going to make a big difference here.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and my guest from Washington, D.C., Steve Pruitt, the Managing Partner at Watts Partners and former Staff Director of the Committee on the Budget of the U.S. House of Representatives. And from Philadelphia, Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer, President of Grasshopper Strategies. Thank you all, gentlemen, and Erica Pitzi, who is here early on, for your comments today. And that's it from this edition of The Point. From me, Jeff Moody, and the team, bye-bye. Thank you as ever for your company.